Okay, let's talk about feedback. For many people, perhaps some of you included, the thought of feedback, whether giving or receiving it, can evoke mostly negative reactions. Your heart rate might go up, which mine is doing right now. Your stomach might clench, those protective walls, they slam into place. So much of what we associate with feedback in the workplace is those high-stakes, formalized feedback sessions where the questions at play feel all-encompassing. Do I still have a job here? Are they going to pay me more next year? Did I get that promotion I was hoping for? These are the sorts of conversations that can feel like a judgment on your whole value as a person, or at least as an employee of the organization. They're scary, they're vulnerable, they're low-agency conversations as a recipient. It's natural that people end up coming into these conversations a bit on the defensive, focused, whether consciously or not, on minimizing hurt, surprise, frustration. Unfortunately, when that happens, we lose the open lines of communication and trust that are needed for feedback to connect effectively and to have any real impact. As Mary said, before I became a software engineer, I worked as an educator for 10 years. I was in the business of helping people learn and grow. A bit of a serial career changer, I did the coding bootcamp thing a few years ago, and now I'm an IC software engineer. Still somewhat in the early stages of building out my own skills and confidence in this career path. So I'd like to offer some strategies from my past career that might help you with using feedback effectively to help the people on your team, like me in my new career, learn and grow. So those high-stakes feedback conversations, in education we call this summative feedback. It marks the end of a period, and it looks backwards to the work done in the period and passes judgment over it. It summarizes a completed state. Summative feedback has its place. Projects need to get done, OKRs need to be met, and people need clarity and alignment on whether they've performed in the way that was expected of them. But the opposite of summative feedback is formative feedback. Formative feedback looks forward. It has as its purpose to form the receiver, to enable the recipient to learn from past work with the aim of improving and growing on future work. While summative feedback is static by nature, looking only at past and current states, formative feedback is dynamic. It doesn't evaluate, but rather transforms. Formative feedback done well helps people grow. So my goal for you today is to leave this talk feeling empowered to build more formative feedback into your managing or coaching relationships in the workplace. To that end, I have 4 tips I'd like to share. Tip 1, separate formative from summative. Studies show that when teachers return an essay to students with both written feedback and a grade on it, the grade is all that they really process. You yourself may remember being a student, getting an assignment back, and going straight for that score. On the flip side, when students receive only the detailed feedback first and the grade later, they actually do better on future assignments. That's because they're given the space and the safety to process the written or formative feedback outside of the high-stakes or summative context, the grade or the score. We can do the same thing with feedback conversations in the workplace. Whatever your cadence and framework for formal reviews, be sure to make space in the in-between times for growth-oriented feedback, for feedback that is independent of any sort of reward or penalty structure, when the individual can be open enough to process and internalize and act upon the feedback provided. Further, and this is important, do this often enough that it loses any lingering sense of formal critique or significance, and just becomes part of your normal routine of one-on-ones or checking in with your team members. Tip 2, narrow and define the scope of feedback. Similar to high-stakes feedback, feedback where everything is in scope can feel overwhelmingly vulnerable and cause recipients to close down to it. Instead, try limiting feedback to a predefined scope, a project or skill that the individual is working on. Even better, ask the recipient what they would like feedback on. What are they wanting to improve on at the present time? Maybe they want to get better at working a particular service in your tech stack. Maybe they feel overwhelmed when they need to write out a scoping document and would like to approach that kind of work with more confidence. One of the most commonly referenced concepts in education is the idea of backwards design. This is the point that in order to effectively design a learning experience, you have to start with what you want someone to take away from the experience and work backwards from there, thinking about first how you and they will know that they have mastered it, what evidence would you expect to see, and from there, how you want to help them get to that mastery and that evidence. If your company has a rubric or guide for engineer expectations at each level, this can be a great starting point for identifying a target skill or competence to work towards. Beware, though, of leaving that target too broad. Level definitions are usually designed to cover a wide range of engineering teams and circumstances. So it's important to really narrow down the target to the version of it that makes sense for the context in which your team operates and for the particular individual with whom you're working. If your company does not have clear level definitions and expectations, you should. And that would be a great starting point for being able to give meaningful, formative feedback. Designing a good level guide could be a whole talk in and of itself, though, so I won't go into too much more detail right now. As Louis said this morning, see me in office hours.
I hope you're enjoying this video, but did you know LeadDev has a lot more to offer?
When I think about LeadDev, I think about bricks and hearts. Bricks are those foundational things that you need to know, and LeadDev provides that through webinars, through videos, through cutting-edge research. But hearts are the things that you need to glue yourself to the people at work. And LeadDev does that through conferences and meetups.
Make sure you check out leaddev.com.
Tip 3, start with a debrief, end with a debrief. There's an oft-repeated quote in education circles from cognitive scientist Daniel Willingham. Memory is the residue of thought. In a longer version of this talk, we would do the following demonstration. I would run through a list of 30 or so words, and for each word, I would ask you to answer one of 3 questions. Either, did I say the word with my head facing forward or turned to the side? Or, did the word I say have an A or a U in it? Or finally, could you on a scale of 1 to 7 please rate the word for pleasantness? How pleasant do you find it? After running through this list of words, asking one of these 3 questions for each word, I would ask you to flip over your paper and write down as many of the words as you could remember. As you may guess, most people remember very few of the words for which they were asked if I turned my head or not. A few of the words for which they were asked, does it have an A or a U in it? And they remember the highest number of words which they were asked to rate for pleasantness. Memory is the residue of thought. Determining whether my head is turned requires absolutely no thought about the word in question. To decide if a word has certain letters in it, you do have to think about the spelling of the word, but not deeply about the substance of the word. But to rate a word for pleasantness, you really have to sit with it a moment, conjure it up in your mind, connect with the feeling that it brings you. And that deep thought leaves behind memory. You can give all the feedback you want. Great, insightful, meaty, encouraging feedback. But it will have no effect if the recipient of the feedback is unable or unwilling to actively engage with it. If a feedback meeting starts with a debrief, however, what did you think went well on that project? How do you currently think about applying skill X? What would you do differently if you were going to do that task again? You initiate the meeting with your recipient actively thinking about the topic under consideration. You're essentially asking them to rate for pleasantness the subject of your feedback. And as a result, you're also priming them to be ready to absorb the feedback that you will bring to the topic. Further, by beginning with a debrief, you're creating a safe space for the individual to feel seen and acknowledged before jumping in with your perspective. Let's say your direct report made a mistake in executing a project. When you start with a debrief, it gives them a chance to show that they understand the mistake that was made and to talk through how they would avoid any similar issues in the future. It destigmatizes failure by treating mistakes as learning opportunities. On the flip side, if the same feedback conversation begins with the manager explaining the mistake that was made and what the individual should have done instead, it becomes very easy to alienate the recipient or put them on the defensive. Yeah, I know I messed up. It wasn't what I intended to do. Gosh, this person thinks I'm an idiot now. And once they've shut down like that, you've lost the active engagement with the feedback. Similarly, debriefing again at the end of the conversation. Does that feedback make sense? Is there anything unclear that doesn't resonate with you? Creates additional active processing and helps lock in the feedback itself, because now the individual is thinking specifically about the contents of the feedback, not only about the initial task or project. Finally, tip number 4, meet them where they are, is brought to you by the zone of proximal development, which Denise explained super well in her talk right after lunch. So you may already remember that, and it was a really terrific explanation. As a reminder, this is a term coined in the 19th century by educational psychologist Lev Vygotsky, and it works from the idea that at every stage of learning, there are things a person can do easily and without help, things they can do with some effort and some help, and things that they cannot do even with any amount of help. Optimal learning conditions aim to help an individual grow through tasks in that middle category. Tasks in the first category are understimulating and add nothing to what they already know, while tasks in the third category are overchallenging and unattainable, and thus also don't offer any growth. In a formative feedback conversation, the goal is to use what you know of the individual's experience and current capabilities to identify a new perspective or explanation or piece of information that will unlock for them a level of skill or understanding that they couldn't get to without it. Again, the more often you have these formative feedback conversations, the more nuanced your knowledge of where they are on each topic should become, and the easier to figure out what you can best offer them at that stage in their learning. So, my mission for you is to carve out space to have more formative feedback conversations in your workplace. However much you think you currently may or may not be doing this already, I guarantee you have room for more. To recap, you'll want to create a regular cadence outside of that once or twice a year formative feedback conversation. The do I still have a job, am I getting a raise conversations, to keep it safe, supportive, and low stakes. You're going to work with the individual to set a narrow and predefined scope for each conversation, ideally taking their lead on what you'd like feedback on so that they're ready and open to getting that feedback from you. You're going to start by having them tell you how they're feeling about the topic, what they're confident on, where they still hope to improve, and how, in order to prime that active thinking and engagement with the topic, with the feedback. And finally, you're going to take that debrief, take what you've seen in their work and what you know of their background and experience, and figure out what's that nugget, that missing puzzle piece, that you can offer to them that's going to help them take what they know and can do already and elevate that into what's until now been just out of reach. With that, I wish you increased trust, communication, and growth in your managerial and coaching relationships, and I hope you let me know how it goes. Thank you.